Islam Makhachev or Khabib Nurmagomedov? Who is the better fighter? Because that's been the debate. That's been the talk for the past 24 hours ever since Makhachev knocked Alexander Volkanovski out in the first round at UFC 294. And although there's an argument to be made for Khabib being the lightweight GOAT, there's an argument to be made for Makhachev being the lightweight GOAT, I'm not here to talk about resume only. I'm here to talk about skill. I think that it's hard to argue that Khabib Nurmagomedov was the better fighter. Now, don't get me wrong. Khabib's one of the greatest fighters to ever do it. I just think Makhachev's better. I think it's very clear at this point that he's the more well-rounded fighter. And that even though Khabib Nurmagomedov may have been a little bit more impressive and ferocious on the ground, he may have hurt people a little bit worse on the ground, his striking was about 10 levels below that of Islam Makhachev. And so the grappling, in my opinion, although I may have to give the edge to Khabib, just slightly, because again, he was a little bit more ferocious, a little bit more punishing, we can't deny that Islam Makhachev is probably the best grappler in the sport right now, and that the gap between them when it comes to grappling isn't so significant. Whereas the gap between them when it comes to the striking is night and day. Islam Makhachev is not only the most defensively sound fighter on the roster when it comes to his striking, he's statistically the hardest guy to hit, which is massive when it comes to being a great striker. Think about Sean Strickland. How did Sean Strickland beat Israel Adesanya, a guy that's widely considered to be the best striker in the sport, which I think would be an asinine take, but my point is a lot of people consider him to be a phenomenal striker. Is he? Well, it was because of the defense. Makhachev is not only as defensively sound as Sean Strickland, if not more, but on top of that, he's one of the nastiest counter strikers in the game that has knockout power and the ability to hurt people on the feet. Just look at what he did to Charles Oliveira. Just look at what he did to Alexander Volkanovski. And these guys are extremely dangerous strikers. Some of the best strikers in the sport. And Makhachev is making them look easy. He's not getting touched by these guys. Now, of course, he had a very close fight with Alexander Volkanovski in their first fight. But again, we're talking about Volk. You're going to have to recognize Volkanovski as one of the best strikers in the UFC. I mean, look at what that man was able to do to Max. Look at what he was able to do to Aldo. For Makhachev to go out there and knock Volk out in the first round, for Makhachev to go out there and not get touched against Charles Oliveira and to drop him on his ass too, was Khabib doing this to people? Not at all, man. Khabib's defense was not only 10 steps below Makhachev's, but the offense wasn't all that either. Khabib didn't have the ability to kick at range. Khabib didn't have the ability to snipe you with a counter left. Khabib didn't have the fortune to be able to stand with guys for an entire round and not only win, but shut them down, not get hit, and knock them out. Khabib's way to win fights was to take people down, and that was pretty much it. Makhachev, and I think I can say this confidently now, this dude doesn't even have to go to the grappling. He just doesn't have to. And so we're talking about one of the best strikers in the entire sport right now. I know that people have a hard time wrapping their head around the idea that Makhachev could be one of the best strikers on earth. And I'm talking about like top 10 level best MMA strikers on earth, because he's seen as a grappler and he's not that flashy and he looks a little bit stiff when he's throwing his kicks and his punches. And it's not fancy, but he is. Could we ever say the same for Khabib? Was this guy widely considered to be one of the best strikers in the sport? Hell no. And that's just not even something you can debate. So Makhachev's skills are much deeper than Khabib's. And it's not like we're talking about a guy that's just night and day better on the ground too. And even though we can say Khabib looked a little bit more ferocious and aggressive on the ground, it's because his level of opposition allowed him to look that way. Makhachev's not running through Charles on the ground in the first because it's Oliveira. That guy's 10 times better than Poirier and Gaethje. And Makhachev still subbed him in the second. That's a whole lot better than subbing Poirier. That's a whole lot better than subbing Justin Gaethje. Because even though these guys are really high level, stylistically, they don't present the same issues. So you could definitely make an argument that if Makhachev was given the opportunity to fight a guy like Dustin Poirier or Justin Gaethje, he would run through them as quickly on the ground. And of course, the striking would be a night and day difference as well. Khabib needed to take these guys down. He had no other option. He didn't have the option to stand with Justin Gaethje. He didn't have the option to stand with Dustin Poirier. Of course, he stood with Gaethje a little bit and walked him down and made him feel the pressure, but he also ate a lot of shots and he lost that first round. Makhachev doesn't need to desperately walk someone down to break them in the first, just to tire them out so he can ultimately get a takedown. He can take his time. He can let guys come to him because he's a sniper on the feet. He's sniping guys from across the octagon. Khabib had to slug it out, right? And that's by virtue of him not necessarily having the skills needed to actually outstrike people on the feet. He's catching them with hooks, nice crispy hooks, when Charles Oliveira is jumping in with a knee. He's not catching them with these big, meaty overhand rights like Khabib. Big wrestler powerhouse overhand. No. He's skillfully tagging these guys with finesse. He's just fighting better levels of competition. The reason why Makhachev's not out here dominating Volk on the ground like Khabib did to Justin Gaethje is because it's Volkanovski, man. Volkanovski is a monster on the ground too. Just his build in general, that's tough to deal with. Khabib Nurmagomedov's level of competition was less in his title fights, man. I don't think you can make the argument that Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, and Conor McGregor are on Volkanovski's level when it comes to grappling. You just can't. I don't care about Justin Gaethje's collegiate wrestling background. I don't give a fuck about Justin Gaethje's collegiate wrestling background. He's not even close to Volk on the ground. Once it hits the mat, he's a fish out of water. Charles Oliveira, yeah, have fun making an argument that Khabib's ever faced anyone that's near the level of Charles Oliveira on the ground. There's a reason why Khabib was dominating those guys with ease. It's because their grappling wasn't shit compared to that of Volk's and Oliveira's. I think it's clear, guys. I think it's clear. Islam Makhachev is the better, more skilled fighter, all right? I mean, just look at his big three wins. Charles Oliveira, that's a guy that is seen as someone that's a top 3 lightweight ever. I know that Gaethje, I know that Poirier are seen as some of the best lightweights to ever do it. They never even held undisputed belts, let alone win the belt multiple times, like Charles. I know that Conor McGregor was a champion. We're talking about 2 title wins. That ain't even a question at this point. And if you're going to talk about their fights or their wins before the title, I mean, look at what Makhachev did before getting his title shot. He beat Bobby Green on short notice, and he finished him in the first. Khabib Nurmagomedov's first title win was on short notice, 1 day's notice against Al Iaquinta, and he took him to decision, right? I mean, Khabib took RDA to decision. Khabib took Edson Barboza to decision. Makhachev has finished every single one of his opponents leading up to that title shot, man. He finished Bobby Green. He finished Drew Dober. He finished Dan Hooker. He finished Thiago Moises. Had a couple of decisions before then, but so did Khabib. I think it's clear that Makhachev has surpassed him a little bit when it comes to skill. Now, when it comes to the resume, again, it's subjective. Islam Makhachev's 14-1. He will certainly pass Khabib, resume-wise, without a doubt in the future. Well, Khabib's 13-0, so right now you can make the argument that Khabib's win-to-loss ratio is just a little bit better than Islam's, and therefore he's still on top. But my argument is, if it weren't for Islam Makhachev losing and getting knocked out at the beginning of his career, he wouldn't be nearly as good. Because this is exactly the loss that made him work on his defenses so much. This is what's forced him to become a nasty counter striker, man. It's because he had to adapt. He couldn't go out there and fight with the same style as Khabib. And because of that, it made him that much better. And if it weren't for him getting knocked out, I don't think we're seeing these level of performances. I don't think we're seeing this guy barely getting hit by a guy like Charles Oliveira. I don't think we're seeing him go out there and completely shut down Volkanovski and knock him out, let alone compete with Volkanovski and go tit for tat with him in the first fight. A striker like Volk, once again, one of the best strikers to ever do it. Just imagine this were a video game, right? Khabib Nurmagomedov's grappling would be maybe maxed out, 100 out of 100. Makhachev's grappling, all right, maybe it's 95 out of 100. But let's look at the striking. Let's look at the striking and not only look at the offensive striking, but the defensive striking. Khabib got hit a whole lot. Kind of depended on his chin, his toughness, his pressure, but he got hit. And offensively, he wasn't laying people out. He wasn't messing people up on the feet. Sure, he had that one moment against Conor, but If we were to look at Makhachev's striking rating in a game, it might even be high up in the 90s. His defense would be about 98 out of 100. His offense may be like 96, 94. Whereas Khabib's, that defense is sitting around that 80 mark and that offense is sitting around that 78 mark. And I know that these are just silly ratings, but at the end of the day, that they're kind of accurate, man. If you were to tally up all these scores, Makhachev is the better fighter. But I want to know what you guys think. Who, in your opinion, is the more skilled fighter? Not who's the lightweight GOAT, not who's higher up on the all-time list, but who's just the more skilled fighter. You can still maybe make an argument for Khabib, but I think it's very, very difficult to do that. Until next time.